The mark of the beast won't be forced upon you with violence. It will be advertised as a necessary upgrade, and you will happily stand in line for your turn. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I never imagined I would be the one to tell a story like this. To the world that once knew me, I was a ghost, a prodigy who simply vanished from the grid. To the parents of my 24 third graders, I was just Ms. Vance, a quiet, dedicated teacher with a patient smile and a strange aversion to technology in the classroom. Both were true and both were a lie. I had lived two entirely different lives. In the first, I helped design the future. I sat in glass-walled rooms with men who spoke of colonizing planets and recoding the human brain as casually as they ordered lunch. I was a senior executive at Neuralink, one of Elon Musk's inner circle, tasked with the godlike ambition of merging the human mind with artificial intelligence. My world was one of impossible deadlines, breathtaking innovation, and the quiet, thrumming hum of servers processing the very architecture of thought. I traded my sleep, my soul, and my youth for a front row seat to the next stage of human evolution. We were titans, we believed, building a new kind of Babel, and our work was celebrated on the cover of every major magazine. My name was synonymous with progress, a name whispered with awe in the lecture halls of MIT and Stanford. But a golden cage is still a cage. The higher I climbed, the more the air thinned, not just in the corporate jet, but in my own spirit. There was a profound, terrifying hollowness to it all, a spiritual vacuum at the center of our glorious creation. We spoke of curing Alzheimer's and paralysis, and we meant it. But beneath that noble cause was a darker, unspoken current, the desire to transcend our own humanity, to defeat death, to become the gods we no longer believed in. I would look at the lines of code, the intricate dance of electrodes on a computer screen simulating a neuron firing, and I would feel a deep, primordial chill. We were charting a map into the very sanctum of consciousness, but we had no moral compass to guide us. We were brilliant, arrogant children playing with a fire we didn't begin to comprehend. So one day I did the unthinkable. At the absolute peak of my career, I walked away from it all. I liquidated my stock options, resigned my position with a 2-sentence email that sent shockwaves through the industry, and simply disappeared. I left behind the world of infinite data and sought a world of scraped knees, of tears over a lost pet, of the messy, inefficient, and beautiful chaos of being simply, vulnerably human. I became a third-grade teacher. That brings me to the crisp autumn morning of November 10th, 2024. That was the day my second life, my carefully constructed sanctuary, was torn apart, the day I died. The morning began with a comforting, analog familiarity. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. I woke before my alarm, watching the early sun filter through the old window panes of my small suburban house, setting the maple tree in my yard ablaze in hues of fire and gold. My routine was my anchor, a quiet prayer of gratitude for a life of simplicity, a life where my greatest challenge was explaining long division, not mapping the cerebral cortex. I thanked God for the chance to shape young hearts, not neural pathways. Arriving at school, the familiar energy of the building enveloped me, the scent of chalk dust and floor polish, the sound of children's laughter echoing in the hallways. It was my world now, a world of tangible reality. My third graders filed in, a beautiful, chaotic collection of bright eyes and untied shoelaces. I remember kneeling to comfort a little girl named Lily, whose face was clouded with sadness because her golden retriever puppy, Barnaby, was sick. I promised her we would all say a little prayer for Barnaby, and her face lit up with a fragile, hopeful smile. In that small, simple moment of shared compassion, I felt a connection more real and profound than any brain-computer interface could ever achieve. The morning passed in a happy blur of history lessons and multiplication tables. It was an ordinary, fulfilling day filled with the sacred work I had chosen. I had no premonition, no inkling that in a few short hours, the life I had so desperately fled would collide with the one I had found, and that the universe would force me to confront the terrifying consequences of the work I had left behind. It happened just after lunch. Around 1:15 p.m., the children had returned from the playground, their cheeks flushed with the autumn chill, and had settled back into the familiar rhythm of the school day. I was at the large whiteboard at the front of the classroom, demonstrating how to solve a long division problem, the blue dry erase marker squeaking slightly with each stroke. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the innocent, upturned faces of my students. In that moment, everything was exactly as it should be: peaceful, orderly, and meaningful. And then the system crashed. It was not a gentle fatting, but a violent, catastrophic shutdown. A sensation I can only describe as a bolt of pure, white-hot energy struck the absolute center of my chest. It wasn't a pain that grew. It was an instantaneous, explosive event, a crushing pressure that detonated within my ribs and radiated through my entire torso, stealing the air from my lungs in a single brutal gasp. The world around me seemed to fracture. The blue marker clattered to the floor, my name, Ms. Vance, written half-finished on the board. I remember clutching my chest, my mind reeling, trying to understand the sudden, incomprehensible betrayal of my own body. In that sliver of a second between the initial blast of pain and the loss of consciousness, my mind, the very consciousness I had once tried to map and digitize, splintered. I was no longer in the classroom. I was standing in a sterile, sun-drenched conference room in Palo Alto, the air humming with the silent power of immense computation. The long, obsidian table reflected the minimalist light fixtures like a dark mirror. Across from me sat Elon, his gaze so intense it felt like it could physically burn through steel, surrounded by the brightest minds I had ever known. On the massive screen behind me was my presentation, a series of elegant, terrifying diagrams illustrating a breakthrough in synaptic bonding for our neural lace. I remember the surge of adrenaline, the intoxicating pride as I explained how my algorithm would allow for a seamless, high-bandwidth data streamed directly from the neocortex. We were breaking barriers that had stood since the dawn of creation. In that room, I was a titan, a Prometheus delivering a new kind of fire. My voice was steady, my logic impeccable, my ambition limitless. I was on top of the world, and the world was about to be remade in our image. Then, just as quickly, the memory shattered. The cold gleam of the conference table dissolved back into the warm, worn wood of my classroom floor, rushing up to meet me. My vision began to tunnel, the bright colors of the children's artwork on the walls dimming to a muted, sickly gray. The curious faces of my students, just moments before so clear and individual, blurred into indistinct, wavering shapes. Their voices, which had been a low murmur of questions and whispers, began to stretch and warp, the sound bending into a distant, metallic roar like a corrupted audio file. The sheer, unadulterated terror in their young eyes was the last thing I truly saw. My knees buckled, the strength leaving my body as if a plug had been pulled. The two worlds of Eleanor Vance collided in a final, chaotic burst of dying thought. A line of code from my presentation, Initiate Synaptic Merge, flashed in my mind's eye, immediately followed by the image of Lily's small, trusting face and a pang of regret that I would never know if her puppy Barnaby got better. My last conscious thought was not a grand rumination on life and death, but a confused, fragmented prayer, a desperate call to a God I had only recently come to know. Lord, what's happening? Then everything went black, not a slow fade, but an instantaneous cut, as if a switch had been flipped. There was no memory of the impact with the floor, no lingering echo of the pain. The crushing agony, the roaring in my ears, the fear, it all just stopped. There was only an abrupt, instantaneous shift from the world of noise and chaos into a realm of absolute silence and a profound, impossible peace. I don't know how much time passed in that silent, peaceful void. It could have been an instant or an eon. But my consciousness, the essential I that was Eleanor Vance, returned. It did not return to the searing pain in my chest or the cold floor of the classroom, but to a state of being I have no earthly words to adequately describe. I was pure awareness. I was observing. I found myself floating, weightless and serene, in the upper corner of the classroom near the ceiling. From this impossible vantage point, the scene below unfolded with a hyperreal clarity that was nothing short of supernatural. My physical senses had been crude, blurry instruments compared to this new perception. I could see the individual fibers in the worn classroom carpet, each one a unique shade of faded blue. I could see the microscopic scratches on the polished surface of the students' desks, and the faint, ghostly remnants of chalk dust dancing in the golden shafts of sunlight slanting through the tall windows. It was as if a veil had been lifted from reality, and I was seeing the world for the first time in its true, astonishing, high-definition state. Below me, the chaos continued. I saw my own body, the empty shell of Eleanor Vance, lying motionless on the floor by the whiteboard. It was a strange, profoundly impersonal sight, like looking at a discarded piece of clothing. I saw the look of sheer, unadulterated terror on the face of my young teaching assistant, a wonderful girl named Chloe, as she frantically spoke into the classroom phone, her voice choked with panic. I saw my students, my dear children, their faces a heartbreaking mixture of confusion and fear, being quickly and quietly ushered out of the room by the teacher from next door. I felt a pang not of sadness for myself, but of love and concern for them, a desire to tell them that it was all right, that Ms. Vance was okay. Then the room exploded with a new energy as paramedics burst in, their movements efficient and urgent, their heavy equipment clattering on the linoleum floor. They surrounded my body, shouting medical terms that my detached mind processed with a strange, academic curiosity. "No pulse, starting compressions," one of them yelled. I watched, an impassive observer, as a kind-faced woman with sweat beading on her brow began performing CPR on my chest, her voice firm and encouraging. "Come on, Eleanor, stay with us. Don't you quit." I felt a gentle urge to reassure her, to tell her, "It's all right. I feel no pain. You're doing a wonderful job, but she's already gone." But I had no mouth to speak, no lungs to form the words. I was simply a point of view, a silent witness to the frantic, heroic efforts to save a life that I sensed had already concluded its journey. That realization should have filled me with a terror beyond imagining. The finality of death, the great unknown, it should have sent me screaming into a vortex of panic, but it did not. Instead, a wave of the most incredible calmness I have ever known washed over me. It was a peace that truly, as the scripture says, surpasses all understanding. It was as if I had spent my entire life, both in the high-stress world of Neuralink and in the quiet dedication of teaching, wearing a heavy, lead-lined coat. A coat of stress, of ambition, of regret, of fear, of earthly cares. And in that moment, I had finally taken it off, and I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying its weight. And that's when I saw her, standing quietly near the classroom doorway, away from the frantic movements of the paramedics, was my grandmother. She had passed on from ovarian cancer a decade earlier, but there she was. She looked just as I remembered her, only better. She was whole, vibrant, radiating a gentle, luminous peace. Her silver hair seemed to glow with an inner light, and she wore the simple, kind smile that had been my anchor in childhood. She wasn't looking at the medical drama unfolding on the floor. She was looking directly at me, at my spirit. She didn't speak with words, but her eyes, full of a love that spanned eternity, communicated everything I needed to know. "It's okay, my child. You are safe now. It's time to come home." In that moment of loving recognition, the final truth settled into my soul with absolute, unshakable certainty. I was dead, and I was not afraid. The moment my grandmother's message of peace settled into my soul, the chaotic scene in the classroom began to dissolve, not by fading, but by being overwritten by a new, infinitely more powerful reality. It began as a tiny, brilliant pinpoint of light in the distance, impossibly bright yet completely gentle on my spiritual eyes. This light was different from any I had ever known. It wasn't the fluorescent glare of an office or the warm glow of the sun. This light was alive. It expanded rapidly, not like an explosion, but like a flower blooming in fast forward, filling my entire field of vision until there was nothing but its warm, embracing presence. It emanated from everywhere and nowhere at once, a living, breathing substance that was the very source of its own illumination. I felt myself being drawn toward it, pulled gently but irresistibly forward. There was no fear, no hesitation. This was not an abduction, it was a homecoming. My spirit recognized this process, this divine protocol, as the most natural, most longed-for thing in existence, a return to my source after a long and confusing tour of duty on Earth. As I moved closer, or rather as the light moved through me, a love so profound, so complete, so unconditional filled every part of my being. It was not a sentimental emotion. It was the physics of this new reality, the foundational element of this dimension. It was a love that knew everything about me with perfect clarity. It knew the arrogant pride I felt in the Neuralink boardrooms, the subtle thrill of wielding immense intellectual power. It knew the corners I had cut, the ethical doubts I had suppressed for the sake of progress. It knew the secret, gnawing loneliness that had haunted me even in rooms full of people, and it loved me completely. Not in spite of these flaws, but somehow through them, seeing the lost and frightened child behind the titan of technology. This love was a tidal wave of grace that didn't just wash over me, it washed through me. I felt a sensation I can only describe as a divine purification. It was as if every burden, every mistake, every scar, and every regret I had carried in my life was being gently and lovingly vaporized by this light. The light was a divine solvent, dissolving the hardened residue of my past. The years of accumulated stress, the constant, grinding pressure to innovate and outperform, it melted away. The deep, unacknowledged guilt I carried for helping to build a technology I knew could be monstrously misused, it was cleansed. The walls I had built around my heart, the defenses I had constructed to survive in a cutthroat world, they crumbled into dust. The light flowed into every fractured part of my soul, filling the spaces I hadn't even realized were empty and broken. I was being unwritten and rewritten, restored to an original, pristine state of being. I felt lighter, purer, more myself than I had ever been in my entire physical existence. The feeling was one of an exquisite and final homecoming. And in the very heart of that loving, cleansing light, I knew who was waiting for me. My soul, the very essence of my being, recognized its creator, its savior. His presence was the source of the light, the source of the love. It was so overwhelming, so powerful, that I felt I would simply dissolve into it like a drop of rain into the ocean. Then I heard a voice. It was not a sound that traveled through a medium to be processed by an ear. It was a voice that resonated in the very center of my spirit, a foundational frequency that had programmed my existence from the beginning of time. It was more familiar to me than my own name, more intimate than my own thoughts. The voice spoke a single word, Eleanor. In that instant, I knew with a certainty that transcended all logic and proof. It was the voice of my Lord, it was Jesus. My journey had only just begun. The moment I recognized his voice, my journey into the light accelerated, pulling me deeper into the very heart of its brilliance. The tunnel around me began to transform. Its walls, which had been pure, undifferentiated light, now shimmered and swirled, coalescing into living, moving images. They were moments from my own life, but I wasn't just watching them on a screen. I was experiencing them again, and with a terrifying, beautiful new dimension of sight. I was seeing my life from his perspective. I felt what he felt. I saw the unseen spiritual realities that underpinned my every choice. The first scene to materialize was one I had replayed in my mind 100 times as a moment of my greatest professional triumph. It was a high-stakes project meeting at Neuralink. A brilliant but cautious junior bioethicist was raising red flags about a new protocol, pointing to data that suggested potential long-term risks for psychological fragmentation. I remembered the feeling of impatience, the pressure from Elon to push the timeline. I saw myself, cool and formidable, stand up and systematically dismantle the young man's arguments. I used my intellect like a weapon, framing his caution as a failure of nerve, a barrier to the glorious future we were building. The board sided with me. The protocol was approved. I had won. But this time I felt no triumph. From his perspective, I felt a wave of profound, divine sorrow. I saw dark, shadowy things I couldn't identify, things of pure malevolence whispering in my ear, applauding my ambition, feeding my pride. I saw the light of genuine concern in the young engineer's soul being quenched by my arrogance. The victory I had celebrated was revealed for what it was, a significant spiritual defeat. The scene shifted. I was in the main lab, bathed in the blue glow of monitors. The air was electric. We had just achieved the first successful high-fidelity data transfer from a prototype chip. Champagne was being uncorked, and my team was lifting me onto their shoulders, chanting my name. I was a hero, a conqueror of biological limitations. But in this divine replay, the memory was hollow and cold. The cheering echoed with an unnatural emptiness. The brilliant minds around me, people I considered my family, were spiritually blind, celebrating the forging of a beautiful, intricate key for a prison door they couldn't see. We thought we were ascending to Olympus, but the vision showed me we were merely digging deeper into a spiritual abyss, so proud of our own shovels. My heart, my spiritual heart, broke with the weight of this revelation. The accomplishments I had built my entire identity on were not just empty, they were shadowed, tainted by an agenda I had been too arrogant to recognize. Then the vision shifted again, and the darkness receded, replaced by a light so pure it was almost painful to behold. I was back in my classroom. I was kneeling on the floor, my hand on the shoulder of little Lily, who was crying over her sick puppy. I had always remembered it as a simple, sweet moment. But now I saw what was truly happening. As I spoke words of comfort to her, I saw a tall, magnificent, shining being, an angel standing right behind me, its hand resting gently on my own shoulder. My small act of human kindness had become a conduit for a torrent of divine love and peace that flowed into the child, a light that pushed back the shadows of fear and sadness around her. Another memory blazed to life. I saw myself alone in the classroom long after the students had gone home. I was sitting at the desk of a particularly difficult boy, one whose anger and defiance had pushed me to my limit that day. I remembered feeling frustrated and defeated. But then I saw myself bow my head and whisper a simple, heartfelt prayer for him, for his peace, for his troubled heart. From my earthly perspective, it was a moment of quiet desperation. From his perspective, my whispered prayer erupted in the spiritual realm like a solar flare. I saw a heavy, oppressive darkness that had been hovering over the boy's life recoil from the light of that prayer, its hold on him weakened. In that instant, the terrible, beautiful economy of heaven was laid bare before me. My years of celebrated work at Neuralink, the awards, the patents, the world-changing breakthroughs, in the ledger of eternity, they were a handful of dust. But a moment of compassion for a child, a whispered prayer for a troubled soul, these were the things that weighed like gold. These were the only things that had echoed with the light of eternity. Tears I couldn't physically shed streamed down my spiritual face. The life I had been so proud of was a monument to myself. The life I had considered so small and insignificant was the only one that had truly mattered. As the last echoes of my life review faded, the sensation of moving through the tunnel ceased. The light around me expanded into a boundless realm of serene, brilliant peace. The very atmosphere, if you could call it that, vibrated with a holy purity and a fragrance that was a combination of blooming gardens, clean rain, and something else, the scent of pure, uncreated holiness itself. I had arrived, and then he stood before me in his full glory. I had already heard his voice and felt his presence, but to see him, truly see him, was to understand the poverty of human language. His robes were a white so pure and absolute that they seemed to be woven from the living light of this place, shimmering and flowing with a life of their own. His face was both instantly familiar, as if I had known it for all of eternity, and yet utterly impossible to describe. It was the source of all beauty, the archetype from which all earthly goodness is but a faint echo, and his hands. I saw his hands, and they bore the faint, luminous scars of the nails. But these were not wounds of a past trauma. They radiated a gentle, healing light, living testaments to a love that had conquered death itself. My reaction was not a choice. It was an involuntary reflex of the soul. My entire being performed the action of falling to my knees, of prostrating myself before him. It was not an act of fear or obligation, but of overwhelming, uncontainable love and awe. Every fiber of my new form, every quark of my consciousness recognized its creator, its purpose, its king, the Logos. The very word through whom all things, including the complex universe I had once tried to master with science, were made. He spoke, and his voice was both powerful enough to command galaxies into existence and gentle enough to soothe a crying child. Rise, Eleanor, I stood, my spiritual gaze drawn irresistibly to his, and that is when I saw it, his eyes. How could I ever describe his eyes? They held eternity within them, entire oceans of wisdom, the comforting fire of perfect righteousness, and a love so vast, so personal, so complete, that I felt my own sense of self could simply dissolve into them like a grain of sand into the sea. This was the love I had been searching for my entire life, in my work, in my relationships, in my escape to a quieter life. It was all here, the answer to every question I had ever had. And yet, there in the midst of that perfect, overwhelming love, I was stunned to see something else, a profound, heartbreaking sorrow. It was a grief so deep and ancient it felt as if it contained the pain of all creation. It wasn't the sorrow of defeat or despair, but the sorrow of a loving father watching his beloved children run willingly toward a cliff's edge. I couldn't comprehend it. How could he, the victorious Lord of all, carry such an ocean of grief in his gaze? The King of Kings looked heartbroken. Before I could even formulate the question in my mind, he reached out his hand, the one bearing the radiant scar, and gently touched my temple. The moment his skin, or what served as skin in that realm, made contact with mine, A torrent of pure understanding flooded my being. It was not a lesson or an explanation, it was an instantaneous impartation. I was no longer just seeing him, I was seeing with him. I wasn't just feeling his love, I was feeling his heart. I saw the world not as a blue marble spinning in space, but as he saw it, a world of billions of his precious children, whom he adored with a love I could barely withstand, all of them stumbling in a darkness they did not see, breathing in a poison they did not recognize. I suddenly understood the reason for his sorrow. It was the sorrow of a savior whose rescue was being ignored. It was the grief for a world teetering on the very edge of the most profound and systematic spiritual deception in its history, and he had brought me here to see it. The moment I understood his sorrow, the fabric of the reality around me shifted. The boundless realm of pure light remained, but a vision was projected within it, as if I were looking through his eyes at the world I had just left behind. I saw the Earth not as the beautiful blue and white sphere I remembered from photographs, but as a planet under siege. It was enveloped in a thick, dark spiritual mist, a living miasma that churned and swirled with a malevolent intelligence. It wasn't smoke or pollution. It was a greasy, spiritual smog, shades of deep gray and a sickly, bruised purple, clinging to the surface of the globe like a sickness. It was an atmosphere composed of pure deception, a fog woven from the threads of lies, confusion, apathy, lust, pride, and fear. It moved with purpose, thickening into suffocating clouds over entire cities and nations, while its insidious tendrils crept into every corner of human society. I watched in absolute horror as this fog seeped into the very foundations of the world I knew. I saw it coiling around the great halls of power, wrapping itself around capitol buildings and parliamentary chambers. Inside, I saw leaders making decisions not for justice or truth, but for power and control, their judgment clouded by the whispers of the fog they were unknowingly breathing. I saw the fog pouring out of media conglomerates, a relentless black river flowing from television screens, news websites, and social media feeds directly into the minds of billions. It was a torrent of manufactured outrage, divisive headlines, sensual distractions, and sophisticated half-truths, and people were drinking it in, mesmerized and addicted, their spiritual senses being systematically numbed with every scroll and every click. The vision took me to the sprawling campuses of great universities, places I once revered as bastions of truth-seeking. But I saw them shrouded in a particularly dense fog of intellectual pride, a place where absolute truth was mocked as naive and God's morality was dismissed as an archaic superstition. I saw young, bright minds full of potential, inhaling this poisonous air and emerging with spirits full of confusion and hearts empty of faith. But the most devastating sight of all was the fog's infiltration of the church. This revelation struck me with the force of a physical blow. I saw beautiful, historic cathedrals and gleaming, modern megachurches, and to my horror, I saw tendrils of that same greasy mist seeping in under their doors and through the cracks in their stained glass windows. Inside, I saw how it worked its poison. It didn't always come as a frontal assault, but as a subtle dilution. It made sermons that should have been swords into soft pillows, turning the radical, life-altering call of the gospel into a comfortable, therapeutic self-help message. It sowed seeds of division over trivial matters, turning brothers and sisters against one another. It made congregations fall in love with the world's approval, to seek relevance in the eyes of a culture that was drowning in the fog. As I watched this global, slow-motion poisoning, I saw the people on the ground going about their daily lives completely unaware. They walked through this spiritual atmosphere every day, breathing it into their very souls. I could see, with my new eyes, how with every breath their inner light dimmed just a little. Their discernment grew clouded. Their passions were subtly steered away from the eternal and toward the temporary. It was a war being waged on a subconscious level for the highest possible stakes. As I reeled from the horror of this vision, the voice of Jesus resonated within me, calm, steady, and full of that same profound sorrow. This, Eleanor, is the great deception. This is the spiritual war for the souls of humanity. The greatest tragedy is not that the battle is raging, but that my own children do not know they are on the battlefield. They are casualties of a war they believe is peace. As the horrifying reality of the spiritual fog settled upon me, the vision Jesus was showing me began to shift. The global perspective narrowed, the lens of my spiritual sight zooming in with breathtaking speed, pushing through the dark clouds of deception toward the earth below. We moved forward in time. I found myself standing on a street in a city of the near future. It was stunningly beautiful. The architecture was sleek and organic, with gleaming towers that seemed to touch a sky free of any pollution. There was no trash, no crime, no visible poverty. People moved along the silent streets with a placid, unnerving grace. On the surface, it was the perfect realization of the utopian dream we had so often discussed in our strategy meetings at Neuralink. It was the world we had promised to build, a world of perfect efficiency, safety, and convenience. Then the vision guided my focus to a building that looked more like a luxury spa than a medical facility. Inside, people of all ages were lined up, their faces filled not with fear, but with an eager, almost religious anticipation. Holographic advertisements on the walls glowed with promises: the ultimate integration, evolve your consciousness, live a seamless life. I watched as, one by one, they underwent a simple, painless procedure. A calm, smiling attendant would use a sleek, silver device to inject a tiny, glowing microchip just under the skin of their right hand or on their forehead. There was no coercion, they were choosing this. They were paying for this. I saw them leave the clinic and re-enter the world, and I saw the technology in action. A woman paid for her groceries at a market simply by waving her hand over a sensor. A man accessed a restricted building with a similar gesture. I saw a group of friends sitting at a cafe, all of them silent, but their eyes were flickering rapidly, and I understood they were communicating, sharing data, living in a hybrid reality, their thoughts seamlessly merged with a global network. It was the frictionless existence we had aimed for, an existence without keys, without wallets, without phones, an existence of ultimate convenience. And then my blood ran cold. A wave of sickening familiarity washed over me, a recognition so profound it felt like a violation of my very soul. The vision zoomed in on one of the holographic ads, displaying a rotating, three-dimensional schematic of the chip's internal architecture. I saw it. The proprietary, braided design of the neural lace interface. It was based on a patent for which I was the lead signatory. I saw the biometric data streaming protocol, the elegant, encrypted handshake between the organic brain and the digital network. I had written the foundational code for that myself on a sleepless, coffee-fueled weekend. I saw the power-efficient microcircuitry designed to draw energy from the body's own bioelectric field. That was my pet project, the breakthrough that had cemented my reputation. A scream that I could not utter tore through my spirit. This was not just similar to my work, this was my work, it was the endgame. The ultimate, perfected, and monstrously perverted culmination of everything I had poured my life into at Neuralink. The ghost of my own creation had risen from the grave of my ambition to enslave the world. I was the spiritual mother of Frankenstein's monster. I had helped build the cage. As I reeled in this silent, soul-shattering scream of horror, the voice of Jesus spoke within me, not with condemnation, but with the sad, gentle clarity of a physician explaining a terminal diagnosis. Do you see, Eleanor, the enemy does not need to create his tools from nothing. He simply needs to co-opt the brilliant, godless ambitions of men. Your dream to elevate humanity, to transcend the limits of your creation, was a powerful and seductive one. But because it was not anchored in my truth and my wisdom, it was a house built on sand, ready to be repurposed by the very forces you sought to conquer. You wanted to save humanity from itself, but you have given it the very tool that will be used for its final damnation. My spirit was still reeling from the personal horror of seeing my life's work twisted into the perfect instrument of enslavement when the vision shifted again. The sleek, futuristic city dissolved, and I found myself an unseen observer inside a massive, packed arena. It was a global Christian conference, a spectacle of modern worship. The stage was bathed in vibrant, shifting lights, and behind the worship band, a colossal LED screen projected inspirational imagery. The air was electric with emotion as thousands of people sang with their hands raised, their faces full of earnest devotion. The energy in the room was palpable, positive, and utterly intoxicating. Then the music faded, and a man walked to the center of the stage. He was handsome, charismatic, and dressed in designer jeans and a stylish blazer. He radiated a friendly authority, the kind of leader who inspires not fear, but deep, personal trust. He was one of the most famous and influential pastors in the world. He began to speak, his voice resonating with warmth and passion through the state-of-the-art sound system. Brothers and sisters, he began with a wide, reassuring smile. For generations, we have prayed for God to open new doors to spread the gospel, to reach every tribe and every tongue. And today, I am here to tell you that God has answered our prayers in a way that our forefathers could have never imagined. The crowd roared with applause. He paused for dramatic effect, and then a shimmering, holographic image of the very chip I had just seen, my chip, materialized in the air beside him. My entire being recoiled. Now I know what some of you are thinking, he said, his tone becoming gentle, almost paternal. You've heard the fearmongers, the conspiracy theorists who want to keep the church trapped in the past. They tell you to be afraid of progress. But I ask you, who is the author of all knowledge? Who is the source of all science and innovation? It is our God. The crowd cheered even louder, a wave of agreement washing over the arena. He continued, his voice rising in a crescendo of excitement. This is not merely a piece of technology. This is a divine provision. This is a tool gifted to humanity through the brilliant minds God Himself inspired to help us fulfill the Great Commission. Imagine a world with no more language barriers for our missionaries. Imagine being able to share the love of Jesus, the peace of the Spirit, directly and instantly with a seeking soul. This technology will allow us to build a safer, more connected, more unified global community, the very community Jesus prayed for in John 17, that they may all be one. He was twisting scripture, consecrating the abomination, and they loved him for it. I watched in absolute, sickening horror as thousands of well-meaning, God-fearing people rose to their feet in a standing ovation, their eyes gleaming with hope as they gazed upon the image of their own chains. With my spiritual sight, I saw the thick, greasy fog of deception swirling gleefully above the crowd, and I watched as they inhaled it deeply with every cheer, their discernment being completely and utterly sedated by the leader they adored. The voice of Jesus spoke in my soul, his tone heavy with the grief I now understood so well. This is how the great falling away begins, not with a rebellion, but with an ovation. They have traded the still, small voice of my spirit for the loud, confident voice of the world. They are more impressed by the wisdom of men like your former boss than by the eternal truths of my word. They will not be forced into the enemy's system. They will be led there by shepherds they trust, and they will call it a blessing. Before the echoes of applause for the blessed microchip could even fade from my spiritual ears, the vision shifted again, plunging me into a different kind of horror. The gleaming arena vanished, and I was shown a panoramic spiritual view of society. I saw people of every color and ethnicity moving through their lives, but between them were shimmering, invisible walls of division. The vision then focused with painful clarity on the deepest, most volatile fracture line, the one between black and white people. It was a wound in the heart of the world, and I was about to be shown that it was being intentionally kept infected. I saw dark, shadowy beings, like living tendrils of the very fog of deception I had witnessed earlier, hovering near people. They were parasites of the soul, and their primary weapon was the whisper. They were whispering lies, customized and targeted with terrifying precision, directly into the spiritual ears of God's children. The vision zoomed in on a young black man walking down a city street. A shadowy entity slithered beside him, its whispers inaudible to the physical ear but devastating to the spirit. I was given the ability to hear the lie. Your pain is your identity. The injustice of the past is the reality of your future. You are a victim, and you will always be a victim. That is your story. Do not ever let them forget what they did. Hold on to your anger. It is the only real power you have. Forgiveness is weakness. Trust is for fools. As the poison of these words seeped into him, I saw how it hooked into the very real, generational wounds of slavery, Jim Crow, and systemic injustice. The enemy was not creating the pain. He was magnifying it, weaponizing it, ensuring the wound could never close and the anger could never cool. The vision then flooded with images from the man's phone, a constant, algorithmically curated feed of outrage, injustice, and division, each post and video a digital confirmation of the demonic whisper. Then the perspective shifted to a young white woman in a university classroom. Another shadowy being was crouched beside her, whispering a different but equally potent lie. You are the problem, your skin is your guilt. You are the inheritor of an unforgivable sin, and you are personally responsible for all the pain of the past. You can never do enough to atone. Your shame must be your guide. Be silent, for your voice is part of the oppression, but know that your silence is also violence. I watched as this lie paralyzed her soul, wrapping her in chains of inherited guilt and confusion. She was being taught to hate herself for the sins of ancestors she had never known, a burden no soul was ever meant to carry. I saw this demonic strategy playing out on a massive scale. I saw black and white Christians sitting in the same church pews, singing the same worship songs to the same God, but the invisible walls were still there. They were separated by a chasm of resentment, misunderstanding, suspicion, and guilt. They were a family at war with itself. The voice of Jesus resonated within me, cutting through the chaos with the clear, heartbreaking ring of truth. Do you see, Eleanor? They are not each other's enemies. They are all my children, redeemed by the very same blood, but they have been made to forget this. This division is the enemy's masterpiece. It is his most effective tool to keep my church weak, distracted, and powerless. While my children are busy fighting a war over the color of their skin, they are utterly blind to the war that is being waged for the content of their souls. He has pitted the wounded against the guilty, ensuring they will never unite to fight their real enemy. In that moment, the depth of the satanic genius behind it all was laid bare. It was never truly about race, that was just the battlefield. The goal was, and always had been, to divide and conquer the one body on earth that could resist the coming tide of deception, a unified, loving church. As the tragic vision of a divided church faded, a deep question formed within my spirit. Lord, why are we so vulnerable to these lies? Before I could even articulate it, Jesus answered by changing the very fabric of my reality once more. We were no longer observing the earth. We were somewhere else, a place outside of time and space. I stood in what looked like a great celestial hall, a boundless expanse of deep, velvety darkness, illuminated not by stars, but by countless millions of shimmering, living lights. They pulsed with a gentle energy, each one a unique and brilliant spark, some blazing with the intensity of a supernova, others glowing with the soft, steady light of a distant nebula. They were breathtakingly beautiful. What are they? I whispered, my soul filled with awe. These are the ones yet to be born, Jesus' voice resonated within me. These are the souls waiting for their time on earth. Each one is a unique thought from the Father's heart. Each one is sent with a specific purpose, a divine blueprint encoded into the very essence of its being. As he spoke, one brilliant spark detached from the celestial choir and drifted towards me. It glowed with a complex internal fire, a mixture of intense white, electric blue, and a soft, warm gold. It was intricate, powerful, and achingly beautiful. I felt an inexplicable sense of recognition, a familiarity that ran deeper than memory. This, Jesus said gently, was you, Eleanor. I was looking at my own soul in its pristine, premortal state before it was ever touched by the world. And then he revealed to me my original blueprint. It was not a set of instructions, but a living intention. He showed me the gifts he had woven into my very fabric, a mind designed for breathtaking innovation and systemic understanding, a spirit of leadership meant to inspire and build, a creator's heart that longed to bring order out of chaos and beauty out of complexity. He showed me the destiny he had dreamed for me, to be a builder for his kingdom, a pioneer of technologies that would heal, unite, and declare his glory. My mind reeled with the sheer magnificence of the calling I had never known. Then, with that same profound sorrow in his voice, he showed me the tragedy of my life. He showed me how, from my earliest years, the enemy had begun a subtle, relentless campaign to hijack that blueprint. He had tempted me by appealing to the very gifts God had given me, flattering my intelligence, stoking my ambition, and twisting my desire to build. My career at Neuralink was revealed for what it truly was, a masterful and devastating diversion. I was using the mind God gave me, the leadership he instilled in me, and the creative passion he gifted me, but I was building for the wrong kingdom. I was a master architect, meticulously designing a beautiful, state-of-the-art wing for the enemy's prison. It was a detour that had led me so far from my true purpose that I had nearly lost my way forever. This is the core of the war, Eleanor, Jesus explained, his words cutting to the heart of everything I had seen. The enemy's primary goal is not simply to tempt my children to sin. It is to make them forget who they truly are. If he can make a soul forget its divine blueprint, he can then offer it 1,000 counterfeit identities to fill the void. Your career, your wealth, your political party, your racial grievance, your worldly success. He will give you anything to define yourself by, as long as it is not me. I was overwhelmed by the truth of it. All the deceptions I had witnessed, the seductive lie of the chip, the poisonous lie of racial hatred, they were only effective because people no longer knew who they were. They were lost, wandering with a divine amnesia, and my own life had been the perfect, tragic example of that war. The profound, heartbreaking truth of the stolen blueprint settled over me, reframing my entire understanding of human existence. This was the war behind all other wars. As I grappled with this, Jesus' voice gently guided me forward. Now I will show you where the first battle for that blueprint is fought. The celestial hall of souls faded, and my perspective was tethered to another brilliant spark of light as it detached and began its sacred journey toward Earth. I watched mesmerized as it descended through the cosmos, a comet of pure potential streaking toward its temporal destination. The vision solidified, and I found myself in a sterile, brightly lit hospital room. The air was thick with the metallic scent of antiseptic and the raw human drama of childbirth. A young woman was in the final stages of labor, her husband by her side, his face a mask of anxiety and love. I was witnessing the holy, violent miracle of birth. For a moment, the room was filled with a beautiful, sacred light, a spiritual thinness that marked it as a portal between heaven and earth. Then the baby was born. It let out a piercing cry, a gasp that filled its lungs with air for the very first time. And in that exact instant, the spiritual atmosphere of the room shifted violently. With my spiritual sight, I saw what the joyful parents, the doctors, and the nurses could not. The moment the baby's soul fully entered this world, shadowy forms materialized in the corners of the room, drawn to the pure, untainted light of the newborn like moths to a flame. They were vultures of the spirit, and they had come to stake their claim. Their assault was not physical, it was far more insidious. They began to whisper. They were planting the first tares in the fertile soil of a brand new human soul, seeds of lies designed to grow into a thicket of thorns that would one day choke out the memory of its divine blueprint. I could hear their whispers, and the words were pure, calculated poison. As a nurse took the baby to be weighed and measured, I heard one of the shadows hiss into its spiritual ear. You are not enough, see. You are being judged from your first moment. You must perform, you must measure up. When the baby cried, startled by the cold, bright world, another shadow whispered, This world is not safe. It is a place of pain and fear. Be afraid, trust no one. I saw the father and mother have a brief, tense exchange, their words sharpened by exhaustion and stress, and a third shadow seized the opportunity to whisper to the child, You are a burden. Your existence causes conflict. You are not wanted. When the baby was finally swaddled and placed alone in a small, plastic bassinet, the final whisper was the most devastating of all. You are alone. You will always be alone. It was a blitzkrieg on an undefended soul, a preemptive strike designed to inflict wounds that would shape the child's entire life, creating footholds of insecurity, fear, and rejection before it could even learn its own name. My entire being recoiled in horror. I had always thought of newborns as blank slates, perfect and untouched, but I was wrong. They were not blank slates, they were contested territory. Every soul is born onto an active battlefield, and the war for its identity, its destiny, and its memory of its divine purpose begins with its very first breath. As I watched this silent, unseen violation, I also saw a flicker of hope. Standing silently beside the bassinet was a towering, powerful being of pure light, a guardian angel assigned as a sentinel. The angel did not stop the whispers. Free will was a sacred law, but its presence was a promise, a declaration that the child was not, in fact, alone or undefended. The battle had been joined. The devastating realization crashed over me. The enemy's strategy was to define us with wounds before we could ever be defined by love. He sought to cripple us in the cradle so we would spend our lives looking down at our own brokenness, never up at the magnificent purpose for which we were created. The vision of the assault in the cradle left me utterly shattered. The enemy's strategy was horrifyingly perfect, a campaign of spiritual warfare that began before its victims could even think or speak. A profound despair settled over me, a feeling of absolute hopelessness. How could we ever fight this? How could any soul possibly survive such a relentless, calculated assault on its identity? Lord, my spirit cried out in anguish, how can we possibly win? In response to my despair, Jesus did not offer words but another vision. I was looking at the earth again, shrouded in that sickly, intelligent fog of deception. The darkness was vast, oppressive, and seemingly triumphant. But then, just as my hope began to completely fail, something new happened. A single, brilliant pinpoint of light erupted on the dark surface of the globe, then another and another. Soon, the entire planet was dotted with them, thousands upon thousands of defiant lights shining with a fierce, holy intensity. They were lighthouses in the fog, stars in an endless night, and I saw that the darkness, for all its power, could not extinguish a single one of them. In fact, wherever a light shone, the fog was being actively pushed back, dissolved by the sheer force of its purity. "These are my warriors," Jesus' voice resonated, no longer filled with sorrow, but with a note of divine pride. "These are the ones who have remembered their blueprint." The vision zoomed in, and I saw who these lights were. They were not the people the world celebrated. I saw a mechanic in a grimy garage in Ohio, his hands black with grease, putting a hand on the shoulder of his coworker and praying for his struggling marriage. A brilliant, powerful light emanated from him, and I saw the oppressive spiritual cloud that had been hanging over his friend begin to thin and dissipate. I saw an exhausted stay-at-home mother in Nigeria, kneeling beside the beds of her sleeping children, praying fiercely for their protection from the darkness of the world. I saw her simple, love-fueled prayers build a luminous, impenetrable dome of light over her home, a fortress of salvation in a dark neighborhood. I saw an elderly nurse in a chaotic hospital in Brazil, quietly reading her Bible in a crowded cafeteria on her break, her spirit radiating a peace so profound that it subtly calmed the frantic, fearful atmosphere around her. Jesus explained the spiritual physics of their power. Their weapons are not of this world, Eleanor. They do not fight with anger, with protest, or with political power. They fight with truth spoken in love, which cuts through the fog of lies. They fight with radical forgiveness, which shatters the chains of bitterness the enemy uses to bind souls. And their most powerful weapon is prayer, which unleashes the power of heaven here on earth. To show me the true scale of this power, the vision focused on a single family. I saw their generational line, and attached to it was a dark, ancient, and powerful demonic stronghold of alcoholism and rage. For centuries, it had passed from father to son, a curse that had destroyed lives and broken hearts. But then I saw one woman in the current generation, a woman who had come to know Jesus. She was on her knees in her small living room, her face stained with tears. She was not shouting or making a show. She was waging war in the spirit with a gut-wrenching, faith-filled prayer, crying out for the freedom of her bloodline. I watched, breathless, as her prayer rose up from her living room like a concentrated beam of pure, white-hot light. It traveled through the spiritual realm and struck the ancient, dark stronghold attached to her family. For a moment, the entity resisted, but it was no match for the authority of Jesus Christ invoked by a believing heart. Cracks of light appeared all over the dark structure, and then, with a silent spiritual detonation, the entire demonic fortress shattered into dust and vanished. The curse was broken, the chains were gone. I was filled with a new, fierce, and unquenchable hope. The enemy was cunning, but our God was infinitely more powerful. The darkness was real, but a single, small light, armed with faith, could make it flee in terror. The brilliant, hopeful vision of the praying warriors faded, and a solemn quiet settled in my spirit. Jesus' voice returned, gentle but infused with a profound gravity. "You have seen the power of the light, Eleanor. Now you must see the final outcome for the world that chooses the darkness, a darkness that will present itself as the ultimate light." The vision shifted for a final time. I was standing once again in the city of the future, but it was no longer just one city. It was the entire world. Humanity had unified under a single global system, creating a planet-wide civilization of breathtaking beauty and perfect efficiency. I saw fields that harvested themselves, weather that was perfectly controlled, and diseases that had been completely eradicated. There was no more war, no more crime, no more poverty, no more hunger. By every conceivable worldly metric, humanity had finally achieved paradise. It was the perfect society, the utopia we had dreamed of in our most ambitious moments at Neuralink. But as I looked closer, a deep, soul-level chill crept over me. This perfect world was utterly and completely dead inside. I watched the people. They moved with a silent, synchronized grace, their faces placid, serene, and horrifyingly empty. There was no laughter echoing in the beautiful, pristine parks. There were no tears of joy or sorrow. I saw families sitting together on benches, but they did not speak or touch. Their eyes were all unfocused, their minds silently interfacing with the global network that managed their every need. The messy, chaotic, beautiful friction of human relationship had been replaced by the silent, frictionless hum of data transfer. There was no art, no music with a soul, no spontaneous creativity. Everything that made humanity wonderfully and unpredictably human had been smoothed away, optimized into non-existence. They were comfortable, they were safe, they were provided for, and they were slaves. High above the silent, efficient cities, on every towering screen and shimmering holographic display, was the face of one man, the world leader. He was handsome, charismatic, and his voice, which was being broadcast globally, was a soothing balm of reassurance and hope. I listened to his words, and a final, sickening wave of recognition washed over me. He spoke of a new era for mankind, of the final victory over suffering and division, and he was using our words, my words. He spoke of transcending our biological limitations, of achieving a new collective consciousness, of taking the next bold step in human evolution. It was the exact utopian rhetoric, the very phrases we had crafted in the boardrooms of Neuralink to sell our vision to investors and the world. He was the political messiah, bringing to fruition the technological gospel we had written. In that moment, I understood the ultimate horror of the enemy's plan. This was not a prison of barbed wire and armed guards. That would have been too crude, too easy to rebel against. This was the perfect prison, a gilded cage so comfortable and beautiful that its inmates would not only refuse to leave, but would kill to protect it. Humanity had not been conquered. It had willingly, eagerly surrendered its soul. They had traded their messy, painful, glorious freedom for a life of perfect safety, absolute convenience, and total control. The horror was not the oppression. The horror was the ovation that had welcomed it. This sterile paradise was the most inescapable prison ever devised because its prisoners truly loved their chains. Standing as an unseen observer in this beautiful, dead world, I watched as the final, velvet-gloved hand of control closed upon humanity. The system, which had been so masterfully sold as the ultimate convenience, now revealed its true nature. The choice was about to be taken away. I saw a young mother with a hungry child in a gleaming, fully automated grocery store. She tried to pay for a carton of milk and a loaf of bread, but she had no implant. A calm, dispassionate holographic message materialized before her: transaction canceled. Please schedule your mandatory citizen upgrade for full societal integration. She pleaded with the robotic attendant, but there was no one to plead with. The system was absolute. She left with nothing, her child crying in her arms. I saw an intelligent, capable man called into his office. A polite, smiling hologram of an HR representative informed him that due to new global efficiency protocols, all employment was now contingent on full network integration. His access to the building, his career, his livelihood, all were terminated in a single, bloodless, bureaucratic keystroke. He was escorted out, no longer a productive citizen, but a system error to be deleted. The most chilling scene was at a hospital, where an elderly man, gasping for breath, was denied entry for a life-saving procedure. The reason: his medical records and biometric signature were not on the global network. He was a ghost in the machine, and the machine had no protocol for ghosts. A massive global propaganda campaign accompanied the mandate. The charismatic world leader was on every screen, his face a portrait of sincere concern. He explained that this final upgrade was a necessary step, a matter of public safety, to protect their perfect world from chaos and instability. Those who refused were not portrayed as believers with convictions. They were branded as dangerous dissidents. They were social separatists, data anarchists, and even biothreats to the health of the collective consciousness. I watched as families were torn apart, as children pleaded with their parents, "Just get the upgrade. Why do you have to make things so difficult for everyone?" The social pressure was immense, a psychological vice grip designed to crush any and all resistance. As I watched this horrifying, quiet coercion, the voice of Jesus cut through the vision with a crucial clarification. Listen carefully, Eleanor. This technology, the system you helped to build, is not itself the mark of the beast. That is the subtle deception. It is the perfect, inescapable infrastructure that will be used to administer the mark. He explained that the enemy's plan was a two-step process. First, make humanity dependent on the system for their every need: food, work, health, safety. Once the trap was set and the dependence was total, then, and only then, would the final demand be made. The mark would be the final software update to the hardware they had already willingly accepted. It would be a conscious pledge of allegiance, a declaration of worship to the world's system and its leader in exchange for continued access to life itself. The vision then focused on one of the warriors of light I had seen earlier. She was now an outcast, hiding in the ruins of an old building, her face thin with hunger. A drone hovered outside, broadcasting the final offer: accept the mark, pledge allegiance, and be welcomed back into the warm, safe embrace of the system. Refuse and be cut off completely. I saw the terrible weight of the choice in her eyes. It was no longer a theological debate. It was a stark, brutal, and non-negotiable test of allegiance, your survival or your soul. The harrowing vision of the final choice dissolved, and I was once again standing in the boundless, peaceful realm of pure light, in the unfiltered presence of Jesus. The contrast between the cold, sterile perfection of the world's prison and the warm, living freedom of his kingdom was so absolute, so overwhelming, that my spirit ached with a love and longing I had never known. The full weight of everything he had shown me settled onto my soul: the insidious fog of deception, the brilliant seduction of my own technology, the demonic algorithm of hate, the stolen divine blueprints, the beautiful dead utopia, and the final, brutal test of allegiance. I saw it all with perfect, heartbreaking clarity. I finally understood the depth of his sorrow, because now a fraction of it was my own. Jesus looked at me, his gaze both infinitely loving and intensely purposeful. He gave me my final, direct mandate. Go back, Eleanor, he commanded, his voice resonating with divine authority. You were an architect of the foundation for their prison. Now you must be a witness to the truth of their liberation. Warn them. Do not be afraid, for my true children will hear my voice in your words. Tell them what you have seen. A cry of anguish rose from my spirit. The thought of leaving this place, of leaving him, was an agony beyond any physical pain I had ever experienced. To return to that dark, fog-shrouded world after standing in the glory of this perfect light felt like a fate worse than death. Lord, please, my soul pleaded. I don't want to go back. I want to stay here with you. He smiled, a smile that contained all the comfort and love in the universe, yet his eyes remained serious, filled with the urgency of his mission. Your time in this place is not yet finished, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder, the warmth of it igniting a fire of purpose within me. There are many who are stumbling in the dark and need to hear this warning. They need to know the truth before it is too late. Go, and I will be with you. His words were a final, loving command. Before I could respond, I felt it. A powerful, irresistible pulling sensation, dragging my spirit backward, away from him, away from the light. The journey out was nothing like the gentle journey in. It was a violent, jarring retreat, like being sucked backward through a chaotic vortex. The peace of heaven was stripped from me, layer by layer. The profound love was replaced by a returning sense of coldness and limitation. The silence was shattered by a distant, jarring beeping sound that grew louder and louder. I felt the crushing, oppressive weight of physicality returning, the sensation of being poured back into a vessel that was too small, too cold, too broken. I was being compressed back into the damaged shell of my body, and the pain was excruciating. Then an agonizing, searing fire filled my chest as my lungs spasmed, and I took a ragged, desperate gasp of air. The breath was an agony, like inhaling shards of broken glass after the pure, holy atmosphere of heaven. The beeping of the machines was deafening. The sterile smell of the hospital filled my senses. I was back. My eyelids, heavy as lead, fluttered open. The brilliant, divine light of my Savior's face was gone. Instead, my vision was filled with the blurry, tear-stained, and utterly shocked faces of my brother and my parents, gathered around my hospital bed. I was alive, and I knew, with a burning, unshakable certainty that eclipsed all fear and all pain, that my old life was over. My new mission, the most important work I would ever do, had just begun. I was no longer an executive or a teacher. I was a messenger.